What's up, everybody? Welcome in to another episode where we are going to be discussing the eight passenger case with Ruby Frankie and Jody Hildebrandt. So many of you sent me different versions of Adam Steed's interview. Some of them have been taken off YouTube. And I didn't want to deal with any copyright issues or YouTube strike issues or people trying to pull the interview down. So I listened to a bunch of different versions of it, and there's a different angle I kind of want to discuss this. And of course, what he says is horribly damning, incredibly sad, things that nobody should ever have to go through. He talked a lot about how it can ruin his day, his week, it can affect his family, his kids, his wife. When he talks about this stuff and gets traumatized again, but he thinks it's worth it because the only way these people like Jody Hildebrandt get power and influence and hurt people is when people don't speak up and people don't do what they need to do what's right to stop future abuse and to stop future problems from happening. And so that's why he does it. And I give him a lot of respect for that because it would probably be not probably, it would just be much easier for him if he just went on living his life and never talked about this stuff again, never spoke about it, never told anybody about it. He wouldn't have to deal with it. He wouldn't have to deal with the backlash of people probably saying he's lying or he's defaming people or whatever it may be that I'm sure is coming his way with at least some of the nasty comments or some of the comments from people in certain phases of life or that believe certain things or whatever it may be. So I'm sure a lot of difficulty comes with him sharing this stuff. And we don't have to believe every single thing he said as true. We don't have to, um, say that this is all guarantee. It's a lock. It's, these are still some of them at least allegations or somebody's testimony. And I think that's important because that's what comes out at court is people's testimony. And he lived this himself. This is firsthand stuff that most of what I heard at least, that we're going to talk about today is firsthand stuff. It's not hearsay. It's not somebody told me Jody did this. But most interestingly, we're not going to get into a lot of the graphic nature of some of the stuff he testified to, but interestingly enough to me, as I'm listening to this with kind of my lawyer hat on, I feel like this could be a great witness for Ruby Frankie. I really do. If I represented Ruby Frankie and there's some kind of diminished capacity or maybe not based on some of the stuff Adam Steed said, and she's not going to be innocent. She's not going to walk away with no punishment, but maybe there are some deals to be made if she flips and testifies against Jody Hildebrandt as the kingpin, the leader, the worst part of the abuse in this case. And maybe Ruby Frankie is also a victim of Jody Hildebrandt. I think people are not going to like that, which I understand. And I get it. It's her kids. And she is ultimately the most responsible for protecting her kids. And that's why we have these laws in place for parents that won't protect their kids, even though they should. But listening to Adam Steed, man, I really was thinking he makes a really compelling argument about how very educated and even powerful people can come under the spell and basically be wrapped up in something they think and believe is good and helpful that Jody Hildebrandt is using for her own gain, power, money, fame, whatever it may be, reach. So we're going to talk about some of the specifics today and how I would potentially use them for Ruby Frankie if I was her lawyer. And again, how either way, even if he's not good for Ruby Frankie, you better believe this guy's going to be bad for Jody Hildebrandt and somebody, if I was the prosecutor on the case, I would absolutely have on my witness list. So hit that like button if you guys are interested in this case still, and let me know in the comments. You can also continue to follow along with these cases with us by subscribing to our channel and hitting the bell. So whenever a new video comes out, you're here to get in the comments because I want to know what you think. Do you totally disagree with me? Do you think he's also going to be bad for Ruby Frankie? Do you think there's no way he'd want to help Ruby Frankie, or do you think he would want to help her? Because as I listen to him, well, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about what he says about Ruby Frankie specifically. But if you don't know Adam Steed, he's a victim of abuse in the past who ended up treating with Jody Hildebrandt as a patient, he and his ex-wife and him individually. And he talks a lot about how that physical abuse he suffered earlier on in life paled in comparison to the abuse he felt from Jody Hildebrandt, being her patient, being wrapped up in her vortex, and what she did with his ex-wife. he also said that part of that issue was she created a dual relationship with his ex-wife and would use his files and everything he would talk about in treatment against him. She would tell it to his ex-wife, and how eventually she was reprimanded for that. He talked about how Jody finds a lot of her victims in the Mormon church. And this is important with, again, I'm trying to stick to everything that parallels with the 8 passengers case and the children in this case. And he said that Jody likes to pray on the far right of the Mormon church, the more conservative, the more guilt driven, because she can use that for her power. He compared it to Ted Bundy joining the Mormon church because they're able to get close to the people that they want to abuse. He mentioned multiple times and gave different examples how Jody is absolutely the leader in all of this. She is where it starts, and she uses um, some very common religious sins that are of the nature that include, pornography, and other things that are sometimes sins of the mind. He would talk about, and how, regardless of what your actions were, she would group people together that were actual predators and had committed crimes and have real victims, and people that, struggle with sin, things that they try not to do, or that they have a problem with, or they feel guilt from, or their religion is against, and they want to follow the rules of their religion, and therefore they feel bad about it. And what she does, regardless of what you think about that, regardless of whether you think it's right or wrong to look at that stuff, or whether we agree what's right or what's wrong, or what's a sin and what's not, or even don't like that language, right? I mean, there are people all across the spectrum of what they think about religion, what they think is right and wrong, how we define right and wrong, where we get our moral code, if there is absolute truth, right? We can have discussions about that. I think that those are interesting topics. But the point here with Jody Hildebrandt is she finds out what you're struggling with, whatever your belief system is. And again, a lot of this was geared toward the Mormon church. And then she would use that to gain the power of manipulation and exploit it, to basically sink her teeth into you and control you by saying, it doesn't matter what your actions are. It doesn't matter where you stop. Because you had that thought in the first place, you're as guilty as the perpetrator sitting next to you. And by doing that, she made you feel so bad, and that only she could help you. And he's talking about this firsthand experience. He talked about how she's had some famous people under her care, like Paris Hilton, I think he mentioned. And it's the same teaching of manipulation. Um, and basically, if you look at certain things or have certain thoughts, you're the same as if you commit SA or battery against a victim, or you're a pedophile. And interestingly enough, he made comments that the thought in your head, having that thought in your head, is bad enough for you to get the full punishment as if you committed these crimes of these people, sitting in the same um, room as you for therapy or whatever, people sitting in prison, which to me first popped in my head as when we talked about how at the dependency hearing, where Ruby may have mentioned something about her child committing some kind of crimes. What does that actually mean? Does she mean he actually did something physically, or does she mean he told her he had a thought? And if he had a thought, did Jody say tying him to a rope with handcuffs to the ground and taping them was appropriate because the thought deserves the full punishment? That's what I'm thinking when Adam Steed is talking about this stuff, is the condition and state that these kids were found in, and all the items that were found as part of the search warrant, that you can go back and watch our prior videos to really dig into that stuff. But we know these kids are abused and malnourished. And I said, maybe they're going to say they felt like the punishment fit the crime or fit whatever the actions were. No way that flies in a court of law. But he talks about how people, after going with Jody for weeks and weeks and even months and being under her care, and she starts to brainwash you, you start to say stuff that's completely illogical. He talked about how his ex-wife was smart enough to get into Ivy League, and Jody attached to her because her dad was somebody powerful in the Mormon church. And even she would do things that just made no sense and call the cops on certain things that I can't remember if it was her or somebody else, but he's like, people would call the cops because their husband left a bag somewhere they weren't supposed to leave it. And the cops are like, that's not abuse. What are you talking about? But they start to believe what's put into their head. He also said that Jodi was one of the top recommended counselors from the LDS church, which is problematic, obviously. And he knew as soon as this story broke, when he heard that this 8 passengers person was involved and was Jodi's partner, and he heard she had millions of subscribers on YouTube, he knew that Ruby Franke must have been a patient and a victim of Jodi Hildebrand turned partner and counselor. Because he said the victims of the past would become the counselors of the future. Jodi would like to set up this multi-level marketing type scheme that she would teach you her ways, and then you start to teach those ways. And she would attach to people with money from a settlement, or like his ex-wife who had a father who was powerful in the Mormon church, or Ruby Franke who has millions of followers. She wants to exploit that, extend her reach, increase her power. And that's what she was trying to do. And again, if I'm representing Ruby Franke, I use all this. That Jodi picked out Ruby Franke, used her, manipulated her, forced her to do these things, and she was forcing her to abuse her kids so that Jodi could then make Ruby part of the multi-level marketing scheme to make Jodi more money because of Ruby's reach. And that's how the argument starts to flow. And he also talks about how Jodi would commonly make up fake crimes about people to, again, then say the punishment fits the crime, but also to make them look bad. And again, that's a parallel to what's happening in this case. And so he can't testify to propensity, but he can testify to similar bad acts if they are similar enough to this case that show maybe a mode of the way that she does it, or a motive of why she's doing it this way and why she's done it in the past with that same motive: money, power, fame. And that she can do it to competent people and smart people. And also he talked about how, you start out and Jodi's great and she's engaging and the couple's together and everything's fun. And then 8 weeks in, she splits you up. And now it's husbands over here and wives over here, or males and females, but she separates you, which again is something that was happening with Ruby Franke, and maybe starting a dual type of relationship, which I didn't hear him fully dig into that. I don't know if he meant like actual relationship or, partnership now after she became after she was a client slash patient. Then that would also be a no, obviously, to make them a partner at the same time or begin a romantic relationship with them. But either way, separating them from their husbands, gaining control of the wives, and forcing certain type of cultish activity from the wives. Are those types of parallels going to come out? Because again, Adam Seed's telling his story and comparing it to what's going on with Ruby Franke. And Adam Seed talked about a lot of the mental warfare and spiritual warfare he went through, as far as like the lengths that he looked at to stop the guilt he was feeling. Well, where was Ruby Franke in that spectrum? Was she thinking this is all so bad, I have to fix my kid, I have to help my kid, which every mother should want to do, and she just took the bad, horrible, wrong, abusive, criminal advice of Jodi Hildebrandt to tie her kid to the floor? Because maybe Ruby Franke really did start to believe that that was going to help her child. We can sit back here and say that's horrible. No good mother would ever do that. Maternal instincts. But like, it's a horrible place to be in if you really think that about your child, because somebody has convinced you of that. And then you take their advice on how to fix it because you see them as the expert. Now, I'm not saying any of this is true. This is all allegations, but this is somebody's actual testimony firsthand that I do think could be used as evidence against Jodi Hildebrandt, and potentially for or in favor of Ruby Franke getting some kind of a lesser punishment or taking some kind of deal to also testify against Jodi Hildebrandt. He even says mentally vulnerable people are easily influenced. He says that multiple times throughout the interview that I watched, and I think that that could apply to Ruby Franke. I honestly do. He also, kind of a separate part of how his interview could be used as part of this case is by Kevin Franke, because he focuses in on for a while about how Jodi affects marital issues, custody battles, isolating the men, how she did things to him in his life where he ended up in jail for 14 days on felony charges that shouldn't have even been felonies. He shouldn't have even had an issue with them. It was a minor technicality, but maybe Kevin Franke knew about that. Maybe Kevin Franke was trying to avoid being thrown in prison or jail for 14 days. He said that everything that Jody would get from any of these sessions about the husband would be used against the husband. She would isolate the wife from the husband. She would do things like they can't be intimate for a certain amount of time. The husband has to have supervised visits with the children only, and how they would try to trick the husband into wanting to be intimate with the wife and then turning their back on him and using it against them later, about how they wanted to be intimate even when they shouldn't have even been, and they knew it shouldn't have been in the process that they were in. And during these supervised, and I think in Adam's situation, he had to have supervised for other reasons visits with the children by somebody over 21, and they would accuse anybody that would agree to supervise these visits with Adam of crime so that nobody would want to supervise these visits. And they would use accusations and the systems against men in the process. He said she would sit in the courtroom with certain people during certain cases, and other higher ups in the Mormon church would do so as well. When you would be treating with her in these different sessions, she would say, everybody is sick. Everybody is so sick. And that's why you're here. And you can't make these decisions for yourself because you're so sick. So you don't even know when you can reconcile with your wife, or you don't know when you can reconcile with your kids because you are so sick. Is that going to be an element of what Kevin Franke says? That he wanted to reunite, but he couldn't because he was listening to the program. He was doing what the program said. Or even that Ruby believed everything Jody said, so he had to do what Jody said. Or maybe they threatened criminal action against him. They threatened certain accusations against him that he knew would ruin his life. I think that's a very real possibility based on what we're hearing from Adam Steed and from other people that have come out and discussed the way Jody Hildebrand acted. He also mentioned how his ex-wife would do certain things specifically instructed by Jody as manipulation tools. And afterwards, when they would work, she would basically buy email. He said there will be emails that said those people were suckers, they bought it, things like that. So they knew exactly what they were doing in court cases, with school boards, with different disciplinary boards. Wherever they needed to do it, they followed Jody's orders because he said, as the Mormon church says, do what's right and let the consequences follow. Now, he did also talk about how it might be a blind spot for Jody, thinking you can't duct tape kids and tie them to the floor and things like that. But ultimately, I think he believes Jody knew what she was doing and that it was wrong. And not just Jody, but just just at the end of the video to touch on this, he thinks the Mormon church is involved, is complicit, did a lot of these cover-ups of abuse in the past, was helping Jody, was potentially funding her, I think, if you read between the lines of some of the stuff that he was saying. And it seems like, he believes the Mormon church has some culpability, which is interesting and sad because he was still looking to them for guidance as he was going through his own recovery from abuse and building his life back. And honestly, it's an incredibly sad series of events that happened to him. It seems like he's bounced back and working on himself and his life now and building it back up. But I think he's going to have a lot to say. And I think at the very least, like regardless if he's a witness or not, I think he should be, but regardless if he's a witness or not, he is going to be able to point the prosecutors to other actions by Jody Hildebrand in other scenarios, emails, documentation, hard evidence in black and white. He is one of the just groundbreaking whistleblowers on the Boy Scouts abuse cases, I guess. And he and his family got statute of limitations changed in different states so that they could actually file claims for these abuses. And I think he's got a lot of experience in this, and he is going to use it for good. And I think he's going to point to where the evidence may be able to be found against Jody Hildebrand and maybe Ruby Franke if she was involved in some of these things as well and more of a leader than maybe he suspects or thinks that she may be. But I think he could be a very important key figure in the criminal prosecution against Jody Hildebrand and Ruby Franke. And I think that, the more light we can shed on this situation, the better. Now, sometimes you turn the light on and you see things you don't want to see, and you see things that are dirty and you see things that are gross, but that's the only way to clean them up is to shine that light and not leave the room in darkness, because leaving it dark or covering it up doesn't make it go away. And eventually it's going to be something you can smell that's going to stink, and it's going to erode, and it's going to cause irreparable damage the more you just keep it there, leave it there, ignore it, pretend like it's not there. So I hope that's what he's doing now, shining a light on this. I appreciate you guys for joining me for this one. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what questions you have. Let me know how you think he could affect the case, if he's going to be a positive for Ruby Franke potentially. Obviously a negative for Jody Hildebrand, but hopefully you guys learned something from this video. I appreciate y'all as always. I'm out of here. Until next time. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who might be interested here on YouTube. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us on all social media, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, at Lawyer You Know. But on Instagram, we are still at Tragos Law. So look us up on there. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast, available on all major podcast platforms. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. Of course, all of these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.